Good morning. It is October 24th, 25th, 9:20 in the morning in Los Angeles, Venice specifically. I am with a friend, Moein, who I recently met through another friend who thought he and I should know each other, and I now know he is right, or was right, and still is. And Moeen and I had our first discussion together, and it lasted 3 hours. And at the end, he thought we'd been together about 45 minutes. And I can't say that I let him say anything during that 3 hours, but I did get some glimpses into what he was doing, which was pretty interesting because he has chosen on his own, which I'll let him describe, to subject himself to how many years? You're going to do that, the cycles?
About to be exact, 7 years and 8 months.
Okay, so for 7 years and 8 months, he's chosen to do a 31-day, whatever he wants, caffeine, whatever he wants. He can do anything that appeals to his senses, that triggers his senses, that releases dopamine. And then for 40 days, he goes into effectively a fast of sensation and withdraws from all mind-altering, body-altering chemicals, food, etc., sugar, all of it, caffeine, everything, and spends 40 days and I imagine 40 nights, because I found you last couple weeks ago on the last night of your 40 days on the beach doing headstands before you took a last-minute swim, baptismal swim, and ended that cycle. But tell us what that has been for you and what the original intent was and what you found you've gotten. But what I had said to Moeen also in leading up to this conversation is that he is doing what many of us do in the public, but he's doing in the same body what many of us don't do in the same body. Some of us get sober and some of us don't get sober, but very few people are sober in the midst of committing to a lack of sobriety at the end of that period, and then immediately following it with another segment of sobriety. And I don't know that I could do that. If I could, I would probably be continuing in some way to be using drugs or alcohol. I found that for me, once I start, I don't seem to have the ability to stop. Or when I stop, I don't stop long enough to consider it stopping, because I'm soon, if I get a gap, I go back to it. And I think even you talked about some withdrawals in the first 10 days of stopping that you witness and experience. So tell us more.
Yeah, in a sense, what I've been doing is something pretty experimental, and also I think it's something that my intuition kind of telling me there's some truth in it, like you should do it. Yes. So yeah, it's because to me, like, drugs and external dopamine or external thing that can make us happy, the list, it goes on and on. Like anything you can, it depends on how much sensitive you are. I think even our human biology is a bit different, the way that I get high from caffeine, it might be different from you that you got high from caffeine. So how these external chemical or behavioral or situation will change our happiness, it's a little bit relative. But in rule of thumb, there usually works for the similar way for a human being. For me, just if we can cut all those as much as we can, obviously water, everything is just make us happy. If you're thirsty and drink water, that would make you happy. So that is something that not extreme, or those things that we consider as the stimulus, like caffeine, alcohol, cannabis, sugar, and all these things. If we cut all those things, how would you be happy? How would you see the world with that eyes that just your happiness is not depends on those chemical, and now you want to motivate yourself somehow, stimulate yourself somehow to be happy? And the other side is just see it through the lens of drugs, to see, okay, now you're conditioned to wake up in the morning and take 10 milligram of THC and have a cup of coffee. So that's in a shell, like pretty much that's this two routine that like it's just trying to experience the world through two lenses.
So
That for a lot.
it sounds like in one element you're inducing a sense of happiness, and in the other element you're doing as little as you can and looking for what happiness means when you're not inducing it.
Yes, because there, in society there is a lot of taboos, and if is a drug is good for you or bad, is if any of those things, like so many people, like I think the mainstream is about if you can get to level of happiness without any sort of drug, that is ideal.
Well, and you and I also discussed the fact that even our thoughts stimulate chemicals in our brain, and that if we can think in ways that depress our chemicals' ability to provide a sense of well-being, if depression and anxiety and stress and pressure and all those things that are induced by how we think can inflict a seemingly demoralizing impact on our actual internal chemical factory, which is about as developed as anything that is known to exist so far in the universe. If we can do that simply by what we think, that point during which you're not inducing it by taking external things, you're a witness to the impact of your thinking on those things because they're still stimulating some form of internal chemical reaction or response. What are you finding during the time? What are you finding during the time you're inducing compared to the time that you find yourself doing everything you can to eliminate the sensations that would typically be considered that you would use to give yourself the impression you're happy?
Okay, definitely. The thinking, the way of thinking, and your routine of your life, it defines so much of those. For me, because about 6 years ago, I went through this path. And to go to this path, I created a lifestyle for myself, the routine that I'm spending my time. And it's just a lot of like cutting from social life a little bit, because after I quit my job and I said, okay, so only valuable thing in this world I have that I can count as a currency, really valuable currency, is time. And I said, okay, so let's define a dream in imagination and spend that time on it. So be out of any other system, because in this world we are living in, you can spend that time, which is your currency, on somebody else's dream, or you can, if you're come up with a game and you're strong enough and powerful enough, you can spend your time on the dream that you're projecting. But with the system that we have, like majority of people, I would say more than 90% of population, they're just feeding those visionaries' dreams. So to get to that point of to play the game that I'm going to spend my time on my dream, so I disconnect from myself from the system that currently is in the world is dominant with, like it's the economy system, because to reach to what you wish for, you need to spend your time, which is your currency, in that system. You achieve money, and through that money, you are gonna spend to get your dream. So for me, because my life is a lot of, so because you're busy now, you're spending, if you're in the system, you're spending some of your time on this system, and you are not, because you're busy with something, you're not thinking. For me, because my life is about all this project, this 31, 40, and like observing myself and correcting myself and
How long have you been doing it so far?
About 5 years and 8 months.
How many cycles does that mean? That would be about
On
not quite six a year.
Yes, 71 divided by 365. It's gonna be five something, five and a half cycle per year.
Per year.
Yeah.
So you've been through the full cycle 35 plus times, roughly, or 25 plus.
28.
28 times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So these it wasn't easy to get it to this point, to be honest, because like cutting all those those societies and temptation and like all those things you have, and you just wanna give up for the faith that, because this project is ultimate. If it's successful, it's a good news, I think, for all of us, and that is if faith, it's something that we still don't know where is the originator of faith is coming. I mean, I'm sure there is like expert and you can logically kind of track it down and say where is the faith coming from. But having a faith on something that logically doesn't make sense, but emotionally feels good, that is something that I've been working on to, okay, I'm spending all my time on this faith because emotionally my gut feeling feels right. But logically, the probability of happening is 0.00000 maybe at the infinite put one. And are you still want to spend your time on? Are you still willing to do that thing? So the whole this 4D cycle is, if somebody work on his faith, and no matter how much your dream is not logical, is it gonna happen or not? And that it will be clear like in 2 years and 4 months, that if it's, I mean, maybe you're based on your saying I'm projecting the result to the future, and these are a lot of thinking, and what you've told me, everything is correct. Like the problem is the one that my mind creating those thing problem, and like everything is perfect is. But for me to get to that understanding, so I feel I'm not perfect now.
So talk about the first 10 days of your withdrawal, what you referred to as the withdrawal, that period where now all of a sudden you're stopping any of the things that you had the freedom to do with abandon, in whatever amounts, at whatever time, in whatever ways, and whatever substances. What are those 10 days? What does it start like?
So another challenge in those 40 days, I define a challenge to spend my time. The challenges can be like working on memory, like body, like behavior, like intellectually, like somehow that I can focus on one activity, and for 40 days straight, and spend my majority of time in that activity, that ideally make me better, or like I know more.
The time you're spending is working on some attribute of human endeavor, experience, capacity.
Yes, for those something that I wish to know, and like some skill that I wish to like just challenge. If it is like, for example, I didn't know anything about piano, and I was 34, and then in 140 the challenge was learning the Queen song, the Mama, and then so for 40 days I just focused on that. Like it was just learning this piano, this chord, and all this thing, and then I did it. But so the first beginning of this 4D cycle, which is I don't take anything. So because all of a sudden I found myself in the morning, so you have been get used to, conditioned to take cannabis every day, have sugar every day, like have coffee every day, like maybe once in a while drink, or once in a while if something extraordinary drugs happen, welcome. So, but I find myself in the morning, okay, first of all, the first day and 2 days is not that bad. because I'm still because it's been 30 days of like accumulation of like memories and all these things. So it's not that bad the first 2 days. But eventually on day third, it will doubt a little comes about what I've been doing. And like, because now I'm coming to the more logical thing, because when you're in drug, you're emotional, and you want to see stuff around you the way, because you're happy, right? Like, because you're happy and you see kind of everything optimistic and everything, all the world is beautiful. And now you're cutting all those external dopamine. One part of it, probably your brain, you just get used to those things, you're crushing it down. So it's just like hormones.
There's also chemical influence in how you're thinking of things. So that can seem automatic because it doesn't require much thinking to be induced by chemicals once they're in your system. So I think that, and they take time to leave your body. They don't disappear immediately.
Yes.
I think it took me about 7 years to get over the amount of pot that I smoked.
Yeah, it goes to your bone,
I was in a coma.
That's funny.
But you're clearly describing between those two sections of time, and I know we're going to continue on the 10-day cycle, but you're clearly describing an induced sense of happiness that you can manipulate with exterior stimuli, but you're also talking about an induced sense of happiness that you can manipulate by achieving a goal.
Yeah.
And that section, I had thought more of that being a meditative state, which I know that it is, but it's also using that clarity in that meditative state to focus on a mission.
For sure.
To accomplish something, which is interesting, because by the time of 40 days, you're certainly a lot better than the first day if you've applied yourself at all.
It depends. It depends that if I'm like, if I'm with the challenge that I've defined, like how much I'm happy about the time that I spend on. Yeah. Because this is I'm cycle 28. So it have been cycles that I define a challenge. And
what has been one of those you felt worse about after you started?
What it was?
What's one of the challenges that you felt you weren't as good at, either you expected to be or should have been, or, any of those things that had you feel at the end of that challenge worse than you did by starting it? Like you'd taken on more than you could chew?
Yeah. So one challenge, it was writing a story. The challenge was, in these 40 days, write a story, come up with a story, the full story. And I didn't make it. I mean, I tried some days sitting and writing and all this thing, and like 1 page, 2 page, but it wasn't my dominant time. I'm spending on a challenge, like I didn't take anything of it. That's a different story. I'm trying to just meditate and all this thing, but I didn't fulfill the challenge that I defined in a way, and I felt very guilty about it.
Because it sounds like that's the story today.
Yeah, so I was very I was very guilty about it, and that is suicidal, what I learned. Because
so you were guilty of murder, effectively.
The murder of, like, you are in love, and for 40 times you are trying to challenge yourself to be qualified for that love.
Yeah.
And now you're giving up. You're lazy now. Now you are not spending time because you're bombarded with negative thoughts, because you're bombarded with doubts about this project, is it worth it?
But largely the achievement is what's triggering a lot of those questions as to whether you took on something that you seemed to fail at, and the failing of it had you question the broader sense and scope of what you were doing.
Yes. Probably if I stick on, because the feeling of accomplishment and being productive, no matter what you define, like that is like that will give you happiness, like you feel a feel of accomplishment. And when you're doing it without any help of any friends or any like drugs or anything, you feel like more confidence about how much you're capable of.
And in that 10-day period, you're starting to struggle with your productivity as you're weaning yourself off of your medication per se and starting to face things. So by day 10, you've really got 30 days left of clear productivity. Because I remember you saying to me at one point that at 10 days, you felt sort of that burst of, like I'm back kind of sensation.
Yes, like 7 to 10 days.
Yeah. And what's
7
that
to
sense?
days.
What's that sense in the transition of those days?
Sense of well, first couple of days is like obviously I try to don't think too much. I don't judge myself too much. I'm trying to the first couple of days try to transition smooth and like listen to what I'm like sleeping probably a lot, like probably like 10 hours at night and like 1 hour 2 hour nap during the day, and then just simple like eat, sleep, workout, ocean, something involved, and then the same thing like day 1, day 2, day 3. By day 3 probably like I'm a little bit like my sleep adjusted. And that is very important time for me to come up with about a challenge. And sometimes challenge is defined before 40 days, but sometimes these first couple of days I define a challenge what I'm gonna focus on for the next 40 days.
Right.
And then because situation like it's ideally like in day like 4 or 5 I'm on it, I'm on the challenge, because that is the only thing I can hold on, right? Like if I like don't define a challenge and I'm still being in the mood of okay about the thoughts and whatever, because I don't work, I don't spend my time on other things. Like this is the time that I spend. If I don't define that work, so it's like it's dragging me in because the thoughts attacks and like say okay the frame of you define you have to get to work, but when you have to get to work, when you don't have any supervisor or we don't have any authority to report to, and it doesn't even involve like a financial situation to you, so you can be lazy like because at that point you're just
and there's no greater critic than your own thinking.
Yes, but these challenges at the end doesn't feeding me. It does just feed my imagination. Like these challenges, you put in your situation. Okay, you're in love with your imagination that created all these things that you can perceive, and if you learn JavaScript for 40 days, at the end, the reason you are doing this is not to get hired by a company or make money out of it. The reason you are learning JavaScript is because you want to challenge yourself in a sense and prove to yourself one more time that, oh dear love, I prove it one more time to you that I'm in love. And for that, just that's it.
So it's discipline.
Yeah, but to motivate yourself every day, do that. And I'm not a millionaire, you know what I mean? And like I'm not like still like maybe I'm good for next 2 years and 4 months financially, and that's all about it. You know what I mean? Like, when you're like putting all your risk and all because this thing about survival, and you're still like living under REM, so I'm doing all these things for the sake of just love you without expectation. That is hard to sometimes you wake up in the morning and say like, why am we doing this? Is there any truth in it? Is it like value in it? Like these are maybe just the illusion game that is in your mind, and it's gonna take you to the hole, like to the darkness, at the end. So these thoughts, like those 40 days is like a lot of these things come and can stop me and from like not motivated me. But so far,
sounds a lot like people who have bosses and go to work every day.
Yeah, but yeah, that's Yeah,
Not
the
too
boss,
far off.
the boss is like the way he communicate. I don't know. Like sometimes it's too painful. So it's hard to communicate with boss. So that's the problem.
So in that, let's say 3 to 10 days, what do you find you say 7, so maybe 3 to 7 days. What do you find that transition begins to reveal that gives you a greater chance to achieve that specific goal that you've asked to accomplish? Because it sounds to me that the achievement is where the happiness is. The sense of productivity is where the happiness is. And I would suggest that instinct naturally has us do what we can to do things right. And what means right for us is that we're productive and useful and gainful, that what we translate turns into something that can benefit ourself and beyond. So the benefits you're striving for are obviously not economic, so they become intrinsically virtue, ethical, moral. It's the whole question of who am I, what am I doing, why do I even exist, and what can I get out of that existence that is worthy of claiming for the time I've spent? Which I would say is not really a unique question, but very often one people don't bother to ask because they're afraid of the answer.
Beautiful set. Exactly.
Okay. So, question for you. Do you find it interesting that the expectations, which I would think we talked about this recently about, I never make a choice that's not attached to an expectation. I'm always doing something for something. I don't just say, I'm going to go drive my car, but I don't want to get anywhere. I never sit in the parking lot for an hour pressing the gas pedal and pretending I'm driving. And yet in my brain, I can pretend all sorts of things and make believe they're true, which gives me impressions that are depressing when I end up acting on them as though they are true. So one of those things would be to pretend that if I make a choice, I should only get what I thought I should get when I originally made the choice, rather than begin to realize that what I've always gotten is what I've always gotten, regardless of my expectation or thought of what I should or shouldn't get.
When I was doing a little bit like working in neuroscience lab, they said like less than 100 millisecond are brain judges.
Yes.
So between judges we like it can be like prediction in the effect of actions, because like if I jump from this balcony, so the prediction is you're gonna hurt yourself, and that is it happened very quick.
What's interesting though about that, Moein, is that with our brain is the most complex computer on Earth today, even amongst all the complex computers that have been developed, which are pretty developed compared to 50 years ago. Our brain outstrips them all, does things they can't do quicker than they can do. But it's interesting that in that millisecond that we judge, that we can then conclude that judgment is so worthy that we think it's the only thing we can think, rather than realize we are constantly rejudging everything all the time. And that means it's never conclusive, but constantly up to what we're experiencing. It's always newly being refreshed. We're being rebooted in every one of those milliseconds by new information that adjusts whatever we've calculated in the past.
So how can we? So what's the?
How can we make a decision?
No. How can we Okay, let's go back a little bit. So how can we rewire? Are we going to? What is your point? Can we rewire the thinking, or to don't judge or everything? Because the prediction, expectation is the one that maybe sometimes take you down, right?
Brains judge though. Expectations are based on judgment. That's it.
Exactly.
But if I judge right now
Uh-huh.
how things are,
Uh-huh.
they now have already changed, including the thoughts. Because if the thought can judge as quickly as you said it can, it's
Uh-huh.
constantly rejudging at that same speed, which isn't as quick as the moment because the moment never changes since it's infinitely present.
Uh-huh.
And all I'm doing is thinking that what I'm making out of something in one moment has to be, should be, can only be what that thing is in the next moment, rather than begin to see that that yogic capacity of flexibility in my own brain isn't asking me not to let it do what it's doing, but simply concede what it's doing the way it's doing it, rather than the way I'm thinking about it doing it. And the imposition of thought becomes the intention we have, the actual demand we have for our brain to start operating as we think it should rather than as it is. Well, regardless of how we think, it's always doing exactly what it's doing in its own perfectly designed way.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna go to restroom if you wanna hold it.
I thought I chased you away with the thought.
No, that was a good I I'm not still getting the I understand like the process that you describe. So are we gonna just accept this? It is what it is, or like how
Well, if it
how
isn't what it is, what would it be?
mm, mm. No, about like about expectation, like expectation based on my experiences, like expectation can affect your emotion.
Well, when
Like,
you think,
uh-huh.
the only thing you should expect is what you originally expected in the decision you made.
What is
And
originally? Because there is no
well,
is it,
when you originally make a choice, you have an expectation, I'm suggesting.
so let's put in an example.
Okay, let's say you're going to the refrigerator and you expect to
So
eat.
okay. I feel hungry or
Yes.
desire about something to eat,
Yes.
and based on that desire I have and that need, it can be biologically, it can be anything about my survival, or it can be like something about like
Let's say it's all of them.
anything,
Let's
all
say
of
it's
them,
all of them.
all
Let's say it's all of them.
desires that is
Yeah. It's the culmination of
creative.
everything that's ever happened in the moment.
Okay, so I have a desire to have a sip of coffee,
Yes.
and so my prediction based on the experience I have is
So you're pretty good at that.
yeah, like get the coffee and like put in my
Congratulations.
mouth and like and that but mindset is like ideally I'm gonna feel better. So this is the whole based on that we got reward system, right? So
That's something you can easily control even during your 31 days off or 40 days off.
uh-huh.
You could still decide during that period to pick up that coffee and drink it, though it would violate the terms of your own agreement.
Exactly.
But you could obviously make a new agreement. You're certainly capable of that. It may have lasting impacts because you don't like that you violated the terms you originally set. Because it sounds to me that part of this program or exercise that you're doing is to maintain those agreements and see how things go when you actually commit to something and then follow through on that thing, no matter how you think and feel.
Exactly.
Yes. So in a way, it's testing your own flexibility and your own ability to function in times when you might not feel like doing something and end up doing it. Notice that both are possible. You can feel like not doing something and you can do it, and you can feel like doing something and not do it. And I would say that reveals that choice always includes the option not to be chosen. So addiction is the thought that the only thing we can do is the thing we're about to do. And that comes from thinking there's no other option. And it isn't true. And the impulsive, compulsive nature of addiction is an attempt to fight truth, as though it can be fought, as though it can be denied, as though it can be defied, as though it can be defended against. Because it's always true. If truth is true, it's always true. And it isn't true for me or you, it's true for us, because it's the principled nature of existence. It's what allows us to even beg the question as to whether we should or shouldn't exist, while we couldn't ask the question if we didn't exist. So it's the beginning of looking at things accurately. So in your example, you're using something you can easily control. And typically that's not what people tend to struggle with, because you'd think you're crazy pretty quickly if you decided to get a cup of coffee and then sat at the table and decided not to pick it up while you decided to pick it up, while you decided not to pick it up, while you decided to pick it up. And yet that's exactly what we do with our own experience when we think something outside of our immediate control, like I'm going to get on the freeway and go to the gym. There's a chance we get hit. Somebody T-bones our car. We get pulled over by a police officer for something and they impound the car. We hit a bicyclist or a pedestrian or run up on a curb or the engine breaks. All those possibilities are possible. And by thinking of them, it doesn't make them more possible. It simply acknowledges that they're part of those possibilities. So my expectations, while they may be dashed, when I'm thinking of things accurately, I start seeing that things always go where they go. They always end where they begin. They always reveal themselves as I go toward them. I see more, just like approaching the horizon. You never reach the horizon, but as you move toward it, for every inch you move toward it, you see an inch that was previously unseen. And yet that inch you're now seeing was always there to begin with. We just weren't seeing it. And start to see that the other half of the earth, like any ball we've talked about, you can't see a whole ball at any given moment your whole life. You can't see your own eyes. And yet the things we can't see, we don't doubt are there. We don't say we can't play basketball because I can only see half of the ball, or I'm not playing baseball because they're only using balls I can only see half of. And we don't say I can't see things because I can't see my own eyes, but we say we can't see things in understanding that we can't seem to see visually and tangibly with our senses, and imagine that because we can't see them, they don't exist, and start to dismiss things out of hand because they seem impossible, rather than see that what's impossible is the thinking of them that we're doing. So it's those expectations, like when you commit to writing a story, certainly you did what you did during that time, right?
About spending time on writing a story?
Yeah, that you wrote the story. You've got a story now about the story you didn't write. And I would suggest the story now is probably better because it's actually sort of vintage experience of something that you've really sat on, because it caused you to question yourself and your commitments and the choices you made and the ability you had and all that stuff. But there was never a guarantee that that story was written except in your own expectation. And that's where the failing is. The fact that we rely on ourselves to develop those expectations and then think they're true, as far as I can tell, which I talk about a lot, as you know, is because we make believe what we think is true, rather than simply an image, something imagined, something elusive, something illusionary. When we begin to think it's true and real, we begin to think in delusional terms that all that should happen is what we originally thought should happen. And if it doesn't, we're depressed. And we've let ourselves down. And the only self we've let down is the one we think of in thought, which is ego. Thinking of itself thinks of a self born in thought. That's it. It isn't who we are, it's what we think. And if our thinking's constantly changing, how can we ever get that thing to stay put if it's constantly only what we think of it that's always changing? It's always indicating that it's a flexible rechosen now idea about who we think we are. That's it. Just like the decisions we make.
Mm-hmm.
If we are unable as a sailor to adjust to the actual weather conditions while we're at sea, the chances are we are never getting where we're going, and will put everyone on that vessel at great risk, subjecting them to great harm. All because our own unwillingness is unwilling to accept, to notice that what's happening is actually happening, regardless of what we thought would happen and what we were prepared for happening and what we hoped would happen. All those things are vain. If I'm hoping for something that's hopeless, that's insane. Hope isn't going to change it. It's only going to create a greater depression on my experience for never achieving the thing that's hopelessly impossible anyhow. It's effectively, the root of a lie is making believe that a lie is only true. So it claims to be the only thing it can't ever be, which means a lie has no basis in existence at all, other than the imagined ideas we have about it.
So for that example I mentioned about that, I define a challenge to write a story. So
Yes.
And I didn't do it.
Sounds to me you did it. You just didn't like the story.
Yes. It was like the story goes to drama and like a pain. That was like the dark part of the story.
Right.
I've created,
think of how time since then has allowed you to laugh when the moments when you were in it, you probably didn't think were that funny.
But it's a matter of like like you learn, you do something, you put your finger in the fire and it burns, and you kind of now learn, okay, so if I have option to still put my hand in the fire and burn again, but what would happen is it will give me more pain.
Yes.
That 40 days that I didn't do anything, and it was just, so it was reminded, the learner teach me to like, if you want to survive without any external dopamine and still be happy, and like you find your happiness inside you, because there is two options. One option, you just be not active, be lazy, like just sit and just say, okay, everything gonna come to me. I trust to my relationship with my surrounding and environment, and everything gonna be all right, and just sit and
Well, right now, speaking of that,
uh-huh.
How is everything right now everywhere? Is it doing what it's doing, or is it doing what people think it should be doing?
I think it's relative by the define, like what do you mean? What is happening in everywhere? Like in terms of the whole like functionality of like a life
everywhere.
Exists that we
everywhere.
are
Everywhere that could be considered anywhere, and everywhere that's not considered somewhere. Let's just say everything that's happening. Let's use
I
that.
think for sure, everything in every moment, it's been going through changes, and changes for our human being means that something happened.
Yes. And that means that what's happening right now is happening. As it's happening, by the way, not as I think it should, or as I wished it would, or as I hoped it would.
It's happening, but is it like it's going through like that the prediction comes? Is it going through in the specific direction that the science comes, that you all want to through like intellectual thinking to predict based on the change of movement in anything, what is gonna be located next? And
so the most important part of recognizing those questions is noticing the absolute stability of how things are right now. If our presumption is we need to look at them from doubt rather than assurance, if we're looking at them from a point of view as to whether or not they're doing what they should be doing, we're not simply making the concession that they are doing exactly what they're doing as they're doing it now. And begin to notice that the preoccupation of our thinking again tends to superimpose on all things what we think rather than simply concedes what they're doing, and start to live in the face of recognizing that things aren't how I think they are. Things are exactly how they are all the time. And now I have an assured sense of where I am to begin to consider things with a sense of traction, potential attraction, rather than distraction. Rather than causing calamity immediately and thinking the disturbance I create about trying to think them into the way I think of them, I all of a sudden have a sense of peace and assurance that they are exactly as they are right now and always have been and always will be, regardless of what I think. And now thinking is allowed to do what thinking's designed, which I would suggest is to express a greater knowing nature that we all are presently aware of, that is so pure that happiness isn't a byproduct of it, but contentedness and peace and awareness is a certain product of it that allows us to do things beneficial for all, whether it be economic or socially or artistically, whatever the venture is, it all becomes for all because it already is for all. How it is how it is for everything and everyone right now, as it is.
So all those are byproduct of thinking, no?
Well, it starts to put us on a platform that isn't shaky, so we don't keep wondering why we feel shaky and think that coming from doubt is going to create. If I'm looking through the lens of doubt, I am bound to find doubtful answers. And here's a good question. Why have humans been seeking through the entirety of human existence if they've ever found an answer? We clearly haven't found an answer sufficient to answer the question to constantly be asking and doubting what we're doing and who we are and where we are and whether we belong or whether we should or shouldn't be here or how we should or shouldn't be here, and try constantly to stretch our imagination to figure out how that would be rather than concede it's already how it is now, always has been. Things have always been exactly the way they are. And my experience is that perfection is letting things be as they are, because if you compare something to itself, it's perfect. Doesn't matter the condition it's in. If you match it up to itself, it's perfect. And in physics, there's an axiom that says if two things occupy the same space, two things can't occupy the same space at the same time, which means when I allow things to be what they are from my own conscious awareness, there's nothing there that impacts me. Nothing. I am not depressed over it. I am not impressed over it. It is not distinguishable. There is no distinguishing characteristics in it because it is equitable and neutral, which is a common basis for all of us, where there is no fight, no division, because it's indivisible, inviolable, and immutable. It's naturally those things. That would be our present state of being and our present state of knowing awareness that we know because we don't have to think about it. And when we start thinking about it, we question whether or not we know. So reversing that is easy. It's beginning to see that any thought we've had that isn't accurate and true has just been an illusion of thought, a delusion of the idea that it's true. And that sense of truth creates a conflict which gives us a sense of control over something that actually doesn't even exist. And that's effectively insanity.
So if we're gonna go like, and like you're so what you're saying, like the thinking that so everything is just thinking is an illusion of something that we're gonna get better, or we're gonna get like.
Well, if we're having things the way they are, that's as good as we can have them because it's how they are. That's as good as they are, because what are they going to do? What they do. And what are we going to let them do? What they do. And that's ultimately forgiveness. It's forgiving them what they are, as they are. It's not forgetting and pretending I didn't have anything to do with the misinterpretation I made about those things and all the havoc I create, trying to insist that those things are what I think rather than what they are. It's forgiving. It's forgiveness. It's freedom. It's ultimately the witness of that present awareness becoming obvious, because we're not filling the airspace in our head with confusion, which, if you think of the word confusion, is a lack of fusion, a lack of intimacy, a lack of unity, a lack of togetherness, a lack of cohesion.
So, and these doesn't have to do with thinking?
Well, what I would say it has to do with is beginning to use pain like an owner's manual in a car. If you read the owner's manual and you follow the directions, it typically gives you great utilization of all the facets that are available to use in the car. Now, I don't tend to use the owner's manual until I need something for a specific purpose that I can't find. Then I go to it to get the directions. And once I get the directions, I know how to use it. The functional capacity was always built into the systems that have now gotten so complex that the manuals are 300 pages. But our body language, our sensations like feelings and emotions, and that sense of guilt we have, which, by the way, isn't a feeling, it's a verdict. It's an accurate assessment that we're doing what we're doing to be guilty for what we're doing. So we feel it, rather than think we're not doing what we're doing because everything else is doing it to us, and all the things I'm thinking about them as being, they're not anyhow, and then use them to excuse me being wrong, like other people and places and things. I begin just assessing that, in the simplest terms, everything must be doing what it's doing right now. And it mustn't do it as a demand. It just must be, because there can't be any exceptions to that if, in fact, it's accurate. If everything's doing what it's doing, and it's always been doing what it's doing, and all the interactions that have been interacting have always been interacting, then that's what's been happening. And that's what's happening right now. And the only time I ever witness that is in the present, where I am, where you are, where we are.
But to just be right now, to talk to each other and just be in the present, there's so many thoughts and prediction happened from the power station that produce electricity, and all the design and all these things. We are here, so it's like there is all those thoughts and like prediction have been working that we can be in this moment.
Yes. So we'd be in the moment regardless of the predictions or the lack of predictability.
This form of being, this form of like,
where we are now,
like right now.
Yes.
You know, so I'm still like, it's not clear for me, like what would like. What would you mean by so you're talking about the ability or skill? It seems like that you can so you said like thinking is like an instruction manual of like, if you say the whole body, this is a functional thing, and so there is
the body language is giving us information about how well we're doing, and doing is a function of thought. Thinking is something we do.
That's one way. That is one, and then thinking is like, I think it's a different form of being that is in us. Like, you know, if you were like,
it's a function.
Yeah, it's a function. Like it's a sense. Like you know, I see you, and this information come, and I try to see thinking as a sense. Then so like when I hear.
Well, your senses don't think until your thinking thinks about your senses.
This like, to you, that instant thing is a truth, right? Like you, I hear your voice, and I visually see you, and all this thing, there's a minimum doubt in it, because I feel like this is the reality. This is happening, and it was not all of these are illusion to me. And I said, no, this is like truth. Like this is happening.
what's happening is as close to truth as we can get on planet Earth in bodies. But if you think of what's happening differently than we tend to think of it in time, people say there is no time like the present, and I would suggest there is no time in the present, that the infinitesimal present is not calculable as a beginning and an end because it's always beginning. And
Yeah,
so
you can.
our present state is actually witnessing what truth really is, which isn't spoken, which isn't seen, which isn't heard. It's simply known. And how we translate it would make the difference between us utilizing our full human capacity or misutilizing and dysfunctioning on the basis of thinking that isn't correct. Those are choices, each one. And I'd say we have mastered, as you pointed out, the ability to think that our thinking is the ruler of the entire domain rather than seeing that it's the follower of the leader that knows. And when I think all I am is what I think all I should get is what I expect. And when I don't, I'm unhappy and I'm pissed and I'm upset and I'm beating myself up. And the lingering effects of that can last for years from a failure of something that was always possible, but not expected because I thought somehow I was going to finally do the thing that I couldn't do to prove that I could turn what isn't true into truth. And ultimately, that's what we're fighting for mentally. That's mental anguish, is trying to make truth and reality out of what we're doing rather than see that we are a product of truth and reality. Naturally, there's no fight there. There's no effort there. There's nothing we can do. We can't negotiate our way in or out of that.
Well, this is stable when you're not in pain. When
Excuse me?
this is like a stable, like being, like
Yes.
a state until you're not in pain. So when
pain, you know what pain is? Often thought to be reality, to prove that our physical form is real because it hurts. But in fact, you know what pain's job really is? To tell us we're using the manual wrong. It's just saying.
But it's sometimes it's not about my decision. It's about like circumstances. Like pain is not necessary. I'm responsible for pain. Like,
well, if you're witnessing and reactive or responsive to those circumstances, then I would say it is about your thinking. Because if you were in a coma, it probably wouldn't matter, those circumstances. Or if you were under anesthesia, or if you were in a hypnotic trance, which is effectively what the state of addiction is. It's the idea that we can, you were talking about putting your hand in the fire and it burning. Mm-hmm. In a hypnotic trance, you can be suggested that the fire isn't burning. But if you put your hand in it, your hand will still burn while you don't feel it. And that's what addictive thinking is about. It's trying to get better at feeling worse because we're trying to deny the worst that we're feeling. And that fight can't be won because the worst we're feeling is an accurate indication of the worst thinking we're doing. The thinking that isn't healthy, it isn't natural, it isn't principled, it isn't beneficial, it isn't useful. Now, we have freedom. Love offers us freedom. If our nature is love, an absolute loving source, we are free to think what we want, and that's free will. And will are the choices we make, and those are our prayers. And I would suggest they are all answered all day long by the consequences the effects we immediately create by the causes of what we think. We immediately suffer consequences. And the suffering doesn't mean suffering in pain. It simply means we suffer those consequences. Suffering has a dualistic form of the word. Can be used in two ways. We're just experiencing it. So we're always experiencing the consequence of our thoughts because the immediacy of it, there is no room in our head to get away from the thinking we're doing. So it's a single dimension, and the thing that offers us perspective is our feelings and other people. Where we see them as wrong, we're often seeing what we're doing wrong and thinking we're not. So we're using them as an option, an opportunity to gain perspective on what we're doing, and generally then abuse them, to blame them and fault them for doing things we don't like, and not notice that it's what we are thinking that we don't really like because it isn't true. Truth is not reactive. It doesn't defend itself. It doesn't need to defend itself. Love has no defense. You can't defend it and fight it and win, because it isn't divisible. It isn't something that the opposite of anything absolute is the same. It isn't something else. So that sort of defies the concepts of this dualistic nature we seem to be struggling with, but the only thing we're struggling with is thinking that one part of a dualistic nature can be separate from the other. I can be better and never worse. You can be worse and I'm better as a result. I'm better when you're worse. You're better when I'm worse. Those are all attempts to take extreme positions and make believe they're true, when in fact they're just positions we've taken. And opposition is the function of opposing opposite ends. That's it. It's a fight. It's just a choice we make to make believe the positions we take are true. And what are those positions? Thoughts, points that we're trying to make. And if you listen to most stories, people do not like being interrupted because they are desperately trying to make their point. Why? Because the point can't be made in their own head. There is no point. They're constantly begging for votes. It's like they're running for office to be the self they think they are, and trying to convince everybody by insisting they agree with their story that now they have another vote and it proves they're right, when in fact the attempt itself is evidence of something wrong.
So you think that is it choice like choice it's I feel like so what you're talking is all ultimate power, like
yes,
from 0 to 100.
It's real power.
The word that you have been describing and this situation you've been describing is somebody is in 100% capacity of like end of like performances, like
But
like,
I'm suggesting that power is what truth and reality is. That's what God would be. That's what all the names we've used to create images and likeness of humans in great forms that seem to have the same contemptful, spiteful, hateful, vengeful tendencies humans do, ironically, and not ironically, since we created them that way, but aren't that way, because how they would be is absolute power, but no abusive power. Because they're not struggling with power, they're not struggling with control. They can't be out of control because they are the essence of all that is and all that are. Everything. It is everything. It is the totality of our existence right now for everyone, not just you and I. Everyone and everything is intimately connected to our moment now, and the moment of our moment, using the word in both ways.
So what should we do with it?
That's a very good question.
So now we these are all these things exist and all these things. So
now everything that's possible becomes possible, and we don't have to squander time wondering whether it is. You and I know right now it's possible. That everything possible right now is possible. So the question is, like you said, so what do we do with it? Well, anything we want. And now that I'm not conflicted over what I want, I probably won't do things that I'm going to claim not to want the consequences of. I'm going to say, wow, that didn't go where I thought it would, but I have learned so much more than I would have, and recognized so many other thoughts I had in relation to where I thought I wanted to go. And this has been an incredible experience because I've grown. I've gotten bigger rather than contracting and shrinking and trying to get down to that point. Because if you think of a point, it's something trying to shrink itself down to nothing, which is why it can never be made. Because a point covers the place of other points. you can't make a point that can't be small enough to avoid other points or clear enough to avoid other points. And if it's big at all, it means a smaller point would be hidden by it, which would not allow you to make the point. So in mathematics, you can't make a point. You can't make a line, technically, theoretically. But practically, you can certainly put things on paper and talk about them. And mathematics is basically a conversation that works within the functional capacity of this universe. It, though, falls apart when it approaches infinity. Numbers and all the basic formulas start to get really weird when they start approaching infinity. And yet, when algebra was looked at carefully by Leibniz and Isaac Newton, and they applied infinity as a function, turned infinity into a term that was then applied in the function, it turned algebra into the graceful movement, fluid movement of calculus. And I would say graceful movement would be a form of grace, which we talk about as being this seeming loving presence that allows us to do what we're often incapable of thinking we can do, but seems to happen in a way that's so beautiful and harmonious and unexpected, because now we're starting to witness the natural awareness of our knowing function rather than dysfunction on the basis of what we think it should be or is. And that's the crux of the mental obsession discussion, is to notice that if we're clear about what we're doing wrong and accurate, it has never had any hold on us but the one we kept hanging on to, thinking we would figure it out, straighten it out, and the basis of the thinking was wrong. The seed of an oak tree is not going to be a walnut tree. Scientists can work on that forever, but it's always going to be an oak tree. They could make a hybrid, but it would require two seeds or elements of two seeds. If the seed is corrupt, we are going to act in corrupt ways, think in corrupt ways. And actions always follow thoughts. Voluntary outward actions always follow thoughts, always. So I'm saying we're in a constant state of meditation. We're in a constant state of prayer. Our choices are prayers that are always answered. And our meditation is our ability to learn from the ideas we have, that if we've already got everything and we keep asking for more, we're obviously using denial to think we don't have it and that somehow we can control it. And that would be a form of insanity when we've already got it all now.
Okay, so, you mean like if you be more in that state of meditation and acceptance and kind of instead of like projecting, that thoughts will kind of come to us and we are flow in that state and everything.
Well, to think we need to flow is to think we're not flowing. To think we need to be perfect is to think we're not perfect in our essence. To think we need to grow is to think and admit that we have shrunk. We're shrink wrapped.
Yeah,
start to see the limits of the thinking, begins to notice that the limits are actually the beginning of everything else. They're not the end of anything until we think they're real and true and spend our life defending those limits, which is often what cultures do and nations do. They don't operate on behalf of the people they serve. They operate in favor of ideas that generally keep certain people in charge of those other people by using those ideas. Your country being a perfect example, your country of birth, right now. We have oppressed and suppressed the natural freedom we have in the name of control, because that idea is that we're otherwise out of control if we don't impose on people thoughts that they don't want to think and have them make believe they do believe them and think in that way, simply because we threaten their life if they don't. That is not compliance. That's just flat out abuse. An abnormal use is abuse, and addiction is an abnormal use of thinking. So are allergies. Allergies are reactions, abnormal reactions, or what allergies are. And the abnormal reaction of addiction is to continue to do the same thing, thinking it will produce another different result. And think of the allergies that have grown, just like the disorders that can continue to pile up in terms of names that are associated to this dysfunctional capacity that comes from simply entertaining lies as truth and creates a fractured state, a fractured mental state, which is really our brain thinking, not our mind, that absolutely doesn't exist in the brain, except to the degree that everything that exists on the basis of the substance of that absolute state of being. So it's always there for us to see, and whether we choose to is determined by whether we look and listen. Just like we were told about crossing the street. Look and listen. Why? Because there may be a car coming. It's good information to know that, rather than to think there isn't and wonder why we get hit more often.
But if you would like be in like that meditation state, you don't need to look and listen.
Exactly. But thinking might have some things to learn if it's been thinking that it was that meditative state of all knowing. If we've been relying on thinking as our sole source, we've been denying that we have any greater source. So our practice is dysfunctional naturally, which would lead to a planet that has polluted the air and the water and the soil. That would naturally come. And I would say we've done a pretty good job of that. And depleted resources that were naturally abundant to the point where we're actually pushing things to the point of extinction from overuse. That would be a byproduct that I think we're witnessing, and pretty good example of that kind of thinking. Because enough is never enough in that kind of thinking, because there's nothing, you can't fill a hole that's already filled with air with more air.
I don't think that is the like I can accuse thinking for this. I more than like think. I think thinking is a tool.
Yes.
The cause of those the issue that you mentioned. It's a root in human desires, and some of them you can label as a negative, and you can label some of them as a positive. You know, like
they only become negative when we try to negate what they are.
But for relative, you know, like for example, if I inherited so much money from my dad because my dad was a king and so much authorities, right? And I'm a jealous person biologically, it was coded in my DNA. And I try for power and control. And I have now tools to feed that need that I want. And it's not about thinking. It's about these things that is in my DNA.
Well, I think that's a convenient excuse we use when if choice is choice, we can always not choose.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think our biology and DNA, it play very big role to who we are right now, and a lot of choices that we have, actually we don't have choices, and a lot of them is in just code in our biology.
Well, like let me propose to you that the DNA is always changing, right? It adapts, and it adapts to the conditions it's subjected to. And our DNA historically and genetically and generationally has probably adapted to the toxic pollutants of the thinking we've been doing in ways that we've created characteristics that seem to be inbred. But if they're inbred simply as a consequence of the thinking we've been doing, then changing the thinking would begin to allow the DNA to correct itself by dismantling those ideas as being permanent enough to think that choice can't be chosen. To think that choice can't be chosen is to think there is no choice. And if that were true, we would not be thinking about it. We would just be acting on it. We would never think about it. Because think of all the things that are going on in our body, the trillions of things going on that we don't think about at all that are doing what they're doing right now. Mm-hmm. They don't require our thinking. And yet, when we're stressed and under pressure and anxiety and depression, it impacts and undermines those same physical capacities in every way. The metabolic, cardiac, psychosympathetic, all of it, nervous system, all those systems are undermined by an incapacity to work freely because pressure is created, which leads to inflammation, constriction, all kinds of byproducts that are unhealthy.
Okay, but can you change your eye color as in your DNA?
I'm not sure that I've ever thought of it.
And no, like this is similar. Like, yes. Like, you know what I mean? Yes. Like if you get to that power that you can, I've heard of, like you can change your DNA and it's constantly changing. So ideally, if you can get to that level of power and everything,
Well,
like
think
the
of
glucose and all is part of your DNA, you can change
think of
that
when
one.
an X and Y meet, eye color changes very often. It can stay the same or it can change. It can be one or the other. Some people have one eye blue, one eye brown.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying like if like is it to changing DNA, like if that person was born, but what I'm trying to say is like a lot of these things that who we are.
Yes.
It's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of it, if we don't have that much, I don't know what the ratio, like how much based on like a situation and environment and culture
Yes.
can change you. Like, but you if you have a like a I don't know, like sex obsession, and that is something that it was in your grandfather was, and like some behavior or like it's some because a lot of these depression and all these things can be like I don't know, I think like it
So listen,
like
if we can't change it, it isn't a choice.
no, I'm not
All
saying
right.
we cannot change it.
I am. So
Okay.
I'm saying if we can't change it, it isn't a choice. So I would say that our being nature that doesn't change isn't a choice. It's just a natural state of being. So it isn't something we can negotiate our way in or out of. And yet in thinking, or seem to constantly be thinking about what we need to do to feel that peace and presence, rather than see the idea that our thinking is going to get us there is exactly what's obstructing that awareness of that presence. If it's our nature, we would naturally know it. And maybe we've diminished our knowing capacity to the point where we constantly look for feeling and body semantics to tell us whether we feel good. I mean, think about, typically speaking, people do not strive to feel worse. Why would that be? We must be overcoming something we're doing that's already bad to constantly want to feel better or happy, rather than just content, peaceful, at ease, comfortable, neutral, rather than constantly trying to maintain a high. What is it about the low that we're trying to avoid, other than beginning to admit the damning effects we're having by the things we're doing that aren't accurate or aren't true? And I agree, I think you're on to and talking about this knowing nature isn't a choice. It chose us, in effect. We are a byproduct of it. All nature is a byproduct of that knowing nature. As physicists look closer and closer, they see that there's absolutely some sort of intelligent order to everything that's working. And we think what we haven't figured out yet is a mystery, when the real mystery is why we keep thinking we need to figure it out, while whatever it is we think we haven't figured out has been doing what it's doing the whole time it's been doing anything at all perfectly. So to live with it at peace gives us a much different foundation to begin to operate from functionally and develop in a way that is so bountiful that it reflects the bounty of nature, since everything that's ever been on this planet has come from the planet that we have used to have the things we eventually think we have to have. Everything, nothing's come from Mars yet. We brought a few rocks back from the moon, but I don't think they've sold them yet. I don't think they've had any impact on anything other than the scientific research or biological research or geological research. The point is that if everything's here and we're here, and we're misutilizing the thinking, and you're right, it's something we do. It's not something we are. It can't be who we are if it's something we do, any more than I can be a bird by flapping my arms. And I could flap my arms the rest of my life and wonder why I don't get much done other than that. But I would have done that accurately enough to have done that for that period of time. It just wouldn't be productive for others and abundant for others, and express that natural abundance of that absolute, infinite, unlimited, omnipotent, omniscient nature. So my sense is this is an undoing rather than a redoing. It's just beginning to notice that in the moments of assurance that we have to do something, the one thing we can also do is sit quietly and watch the urge pass, just like a parade. And I'm sure that you've witnessed this during those days that you defined. where you have an impulse to do something. You want to smoke the cigarette, you want to get the coffee, you want to do, and you also notice that as you live with it, it just passes and evaporates. It doesn't to compel you, and it never compelled you, because you have a greater source, a greater intent, a greater awareness than your brain. You're not subject to your brain. Your brain doesn't condemn you to anything, but what you demand of it that it can't do. And then it appears, then we want to say, I'm irresponsible for this because I don't want to take credit for the mess I'm about to make. Yet there's a being knowing that isn't thoughtful at all because it doesn't think. It just simply knows and recognizes disturbances clearly, and our notice of those disturbances is actually beginning to read our body language accurately enough to at least admit, I'm doing something I don't even think I'm doing right now in my thinking that's affecting my entire experience, and leave it at that. Just admitting that is free enough, because I would say it's accurate enough. And the closer we get to accuracy, the greater the potential for contemplation to begin revealing things that we would normally diminish in the capacity that's diminished by our misuse and overuse of thinking. Thinking is our sole source, and start to allow that awareness to start to just reveal itself to us, which I'm sure you have those moments and you described to me. So let's focus, if we can, for a minute or two on, or an hour, on, on the period of time once you've gotten past the 7 or 10 days.
Okay.
What happens in those 30 days in terms of your experience, and in terms of your sense of freedom, and in terms of your sense of awareness, in comparison to the induced state of feeling better? What happens to the intellectual state of awareness that seems to stick longer than often the induced states that feel good for a minute and don't leave you wondering about what happened rather than assure of what happened? If that's correct, I don't know.
Yeah, let me fresh up for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So the question is, what would happen after 10 days?
Yeah, and what's the difference in awareness compared to the 30 days of?
Mm-hmm. So 30 days, well, what would happen in 30 days? Because I'm like,
What's the difference in the intoxication level? Intoxicated with the lack and intoxicated with the act.
So if that 40 days, everything, I can manage to cope with doubt and be hooked in the challenge that I've been defined, and I'm independent from external happiness, and at the same time I'm working on my confidence, and I feel that I'm productive based on the set or projection or prediction, or like anything that I said based on that rule, like if I, in any aspect of life, improve myself, I don't know, like for example, if you say like the ball, I'm gonna like bike for 10 kilometers, and now I'm gonna think for 12 kilometers, and that sense of that improvement, like in any aspect of life, we can like define it. And so it's gonna be a smooth, actually, because now I'm meditating a lot. My thought is about like, I feel like more independent, and my happiness is kind of now is related to my productivity and like achieving to that goal that I set. And but doubt is always there in those 40 days. And I think the nature of what I've been doing, because there is no model outside that happiness, because you talk to your friends or relatives or families, like, what are you doing in your life? Like, probably like the most majority of their time in some sort of activities that involve with interaction with others. And there's some deal between that part going on. But for me, that 40 days is doubt comes to me like after like day 20, 25, like 30 is like all these doubts and coming and affect my happiness a little bit. And at the same time, I feel like a joy of a little bit like dependency, like without anything, I can still be in the moment and just don't emotionally don't go up and down and just being in like a line, just
Yeah.
no judgment, just move forward what you are doing. Everything gonna be all right. Like, you don't overthink it, and just this is the project that you have been on it. Just focus on it, and that's it. Everything gonna come to the place. Don't have any, and don't calculate how are you gonna get there, like, or what's gonna happen. You're just here to finish this thing. That's pretty simple. That's your job, is just to finish this thing and just focus on that. And it become more purified. Like in that 40 days, like when it get to the end, and if I'm stick on my challenges and promises, it's gonna be very rewarding. Like when it get to the close of it, like I'm not deep. And it's funny, like I don't crave at all, like any sort of drug during that 40 days, like at all. Like I don't even want to do anything. Maybe sugar once in a while that I tempted, but I said no. But other like drugs like caffeine, alcohol, kind of none of those even come to me. Like I don't even want it. I think because after like 28 cycle, I've been going back and forth. Maybe my psyche is just conditioning that, like that doesn't want it at all.
What's your doubt level during the 30 days, 31 days?
So doubt level in that 31 days, because I'm like blocking all those external dopamine. Now I have so many options to be, I can have a coffee and to be happy. I can have an ice cream and be happy. I can go out with my friend and party, be happy. I can like smoke and be happy. There's so many external things, and they're not as an effect of my effort and my thoughts. These are just the effect of those pure, like easiest way that I can be happy. And those are very temporary. The happiness of end of that 40 days that I accomplished a challenge, it lasts for me ever. Every time I thought about it, you learn piano, like one song, and still when I go to that memory, makes me happy. But the happiness of I had a cup of coffee that morning and make me happy doesn't last that long. It was just a momentarily in that moment that was. So what I've been doing, like I'm trying to stay happiness just momentary. Yeah. At the same time, work on some sort of happiness can like last forever in my memories. So
what if happy wasn't the goal?
For me is I think that is
because I would say what I'm hearing is the doubt is the unhappiness, and you're doubting you can stay happy, so you're fighting for the life of an idea.
The doubt is coming from that, like the amplitude of like your illusion, like the doubt is coming from like
exactly. Well, you're making believe something is doubtful. I mean, my sense is doubt comes from doubt. We're actually accurately assessing, and our brain is constantly accurately assessing it, but we will either choose to make believe it's something we want to get away from, so we go have the coffee and we have the donut and we have the cookie and we have the this, we have the that, to distract ourselves from it, or say it's always there even when I'm distracted, so why not just pay more attention to what's actually happening rather than what I make believe is happening, and use that as a better guided system that frees me to do more of what I want to do without feeling guilty or condemned by it.
With 31 days, there is no guilt. The nature of 31 days is just I'm free.
Well, you're admitting you're guilty because you're not fighting over it.
Fight over what?
You're doing what you're doing. That is, you're guilty for exactly what you're doing, and you're happy to do it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I accept it.
There's no doubt.
There is no
You
doubt.
don't find the doubt
Yeah,
because it's there, but you're not seeing it. You're basically busy inducing a state of feeling that actually
yes.
ends up not feeling what you're feeling. So it
I mean,
creates.
you can see it both sides. Maybe this is the normal
Yeah.
state. You know,
Yeah.
like maybe this is the
Yes.
normal state of that. If
Yes.
you can look at from each side, that like
When you see it clearly, you will see that both sides are the same thing, that they aren't, like we talked about earlier, opposites attract because they're not apart. They're just positions we take in thought. That's it.
Mhm.
And when you begin to realize that they're not apart and they're just positions we're taking, you can take any position and it won't have the stickiness of an addictive thought or the demand that it's the only thing you can do. Because isn't it interesting that we say we have no other choice when if we didn't, why are we using choice as an excuse to claim we don't have it? Why we wouldn't say we don't have any other choice. We wouldn't say anything about it enough. We'd just be acting on it, just like we act on the knowing nature of our existence without questioning it until we start thinking about what we're doing in thinking. And then question the thinking that that's the existence of our life, when in fact it's just the existence of the imagined ideas we have that we're thinking of.
Mhm.
So most of our experience is witnessing what we're thinking at the expense of our greater awareness that we're always aware of. We just don't think we are. Just like we're always who we are in our essence, that we don't need to think about until we start thinking about who we are. And then we start thinking about who we think we are rather than actually who we are. Because who we are doesn't require thinking. Like truth does not require to be thought of to be. Reality does not require to be thought of to be. And effectively, they're the same thing. And if that's the nature of our existence, it's the nature of all of our existence, everyone, everywhere, all the time, everything, inanimate and living forms. So it isn't a question because there is absolutely no doubt in it, and it isn't in doubt because it's not in question. So all doubt comes from, guess what? Questionable thinking. It's an accurate
I think
admission. It's an accurate admission of exactly what we're doing. And we think of it as something to overcome through more confidence and ambition and gaining more. And that's exactly what the root of addiction is. I'm going to feel better about maintaining the thought that's wrong rather than actually concede the thought's wrong and start to learn more about what is wrong with that thought and let it begin to any thought that's wrong is an illusion. Because that thing you talked about in terms of making that choice is a knowing nature. We make it from a pure sense of awareness that isn't obstructed by the conflicts we create in thought. We know better or we wouldn't feel worse. We know better or we wouldn't be disturbed. We know better or we wouldn't have doubt. It's an indication and clarification of that knowing nature rather than a dismissal of it and an overcoming of it, which can't be done.
don't you think a lot of these doubts coming from desires?
Well, I have a lot of desires, but I don't expect most of them will happen. I just have desires. And one of my desires is to have desires. I don't try to fight it as though, Buddha talked about suffering having to do with attachment. And the idea of attachment has been this sticky seeming mousetrap that we've been glued to throughout humanity because it has not been identified as an addiction and talked about openly. Bill Wilson, who actually created Alcoholics Anonymous, did write about it and said that the mental obsession, the mental problem is the core issue of addiction. Mental obsession is that core issue. So that was written 85 years ago, and it actually has provided a path, which is in almost every country, for people to actually recover from seeming impossible conditions.
But addiction is like addiction. We human beings live with addiction. Like we cannot.
We create it.
I mean, no, addiction is something that, like, in an extreme way, like you cannot function normal without external use.
Well,
And
if you consider what's happening in the world today normal, the addiction rate, the suicide rate, the pollution rate, the contamination rate, the corruption rate, and all that normal, then I would say you're right. But I would say it's unproductive because it's hurting and harming people, just like what's going on in your country right now.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying in terms of addiction is about, like, we are like, we need water.
It's not an addiction.
It's addiction, because if you don't have water, you cannot function normal, and you eventually will dysfunction.
You know what happens if you drink too much water too fast?
Yes. I mean, like, probably dilute it, and you will.
No, it kills you.
It kills you.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying.
The point is, addiction would be drinking so much of it that it kills you, where drinking water actually helps you survive. Our instincts are to help us survive.
Exactly.
Addiction threatens our survival.
Exactly.
Yes.
So my point is, you can use anything
Addictively, yes.
Addictively, and, like, change, or you can, like, maybe somebody drink alcohol once a week, and maybe that is the way that water, if you pour enough water, that will survive. You know what I'm saying? It's like addiction, like addiction personality of human being. We are addicted people, addicted creature. Like in addiction can be like sex. Addiction can be like going to church. Addiction
there's 150
can be like
different programs with symptoms.
Yeah, like so.
And there's probably several 100,000 symptoms.
So I think the issue, like, anything that we condition to, like, to our happiness for that thing, that maybe that is out of control, out of your power now.
Yes.
So if you can take stuff and use it as a tool, as something that there is no wrong or right, like, just the same, like, if somebody, like, seeing like this, if I have you on a mushroom, 5 grams of mushroom, so you're seeing something else, right?
Yeah.
And that thing, yes, when you're on that mushroom, you are not just fully, you're dependent on that chemical,
yes,
or that thing to get to that state. But at the same time, we can argue, like, somebody meditated and go on a trip, and without taking anything, it will
yes,
get to that ultra state. And
so, making that point, though, look at those two dichotomies. One of them is induced, the other one's natural. It's functioning as a result of a. It's
I don't call that one is unnatural. I will say
that it's using our body as a source functionally to provide the sort of experience that we think might only happen externally. And historically, humans have not noticed that when we make believe an illusion, a thought that's imagined is true, we are hallucinating. But we don't tend to enjoy that hallucination very well because the impact on us is depressing. The impression created when it's constantly maintained moment to moment to moment to moment repeatedly, it creates a depression. It creates an impression that becomes depressing in time because it undermines our bodily ability to function on a basis of well-being, because we aren't being well. We're being dysfunctional. We're acting in ways that are contrary to our instinctive drive. And that's where addiction comes in. It may be that you're talking about it being normal for humans because it's always been accessible to humans, And I would suggest that the common nature of it isn't all the varied symptoms, but the common nature of our ability to make believe what is wrong is right and what is right is wrong, and then believe that's true, which can't be possible because something right must be right and something wrong must be wrong. And when they're aligned, there's no conflict. But when I think they're only the opposite of what they are, it's exactly what a lie tries to do by claiming a lie only exists as long as I think it's true. It doesn't exist anywhere in the universe but in my thought. And so humans are uniquely qualified to lie because we can think of ourselves. So what do? Think about our thinking, and think when we think of thinking itself, it thinks up a self born in thought, and that's ego. And we think it's who we are. It is not who we are. It's what we think.
What I'm trying to like from that mushroom is like, like if you sit on an airplane and go up, and you're gonna have a different experience that like not using airplane, right?
Yes.
So that airplane is an external thing that you've been using it and giving you new perspective of what is it from that angle if you look at it. And that trip on the sky with that plane after you landed maybe changed the way of you're seeing the world, or you're coming up with the new ideas or something.
Everything's always changing. So no matter what happens, our thinking is always
like changing. Anything like the external thing that if we can take it and change our perspective, or
it's happening now. It's happening now.
It's happening now. It's just a matter of be open to it, to look at it as a tool, instead of like dependent on those things as on the main purpose of being.
Good. So you're defining that addictive nature in thinking that we're fulfilled by using something obsessively and overusing it as the solution, rather than seeing the whole thought that it can even be the solution is the idea that the solution doesn't exist right now in everything that's happening as it's happening, because it's become only what I think is happening rather than what is happening. And when I feel, when enough is never, effectively addiction is enough is never enough. That's one of the components, right? So if enough is never enough, the definition of enough is completely not enough. There is no enough, right? So what do? Consume more and more and more. What does that lead to? Overdosing. What is overusing thought? Overdosing. It's actually creating all those dopamine, serotonin, abuse of all those chemicals in our body that are designed to have us feel well. And all of a sudden we don't have them when we actually need them, because we've used them up for emergencies that we created for things that don't actually exist. And yet our body abides by whatever we want to do. If you want to create an emergency and feel like there's an emergency, it's going to provide the adrenaline and all the things to give you that sensation. We are capable of that. That's what choice allows us. So addiction is enough is never enough, and I have no other choice. That's that idea that somehow I need it. It fulfills me rather than I am fulfilled now. And to any degree, I think I'm not fulfilled, and who I am is who I am. I think those things are going to do it for me, which is just the maintenance of another lie. It doesn't mean you can't do those things. It means you can do those things. It means that they just give you the effect they give you, and what they give you is an effect. That's all. They give you an effect. It doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change. Doing it more isn't going to make you better. It's not going to make you worse. Doing it excessively to kill yourself, I would say, is somewhat off base from our nature. Because maybe
it's a choice.
Given all of our failings, has created 8+ billion people or whatever are on the planet. It's a pretty good indication that we are designed to thrive. In the face of everything we can do wrong, we continue to grow. That's pretty amazing, but it's helping us see by use of that, by having achieved that accomplishment, that more people are starting to show the weakness and frailty of the decisions we've been making for a long time that are unsustainable and fiscally irresponsible and can't continue without having catastrophic consequences finally reveal the wrong, because we don't seem to be sensitive enough to want to admit what we're doing now. We wait for disasters to finally decide. Typically, I did in my life, I waited till everything fell apart before I finally said, I might have a problem here. I might actually have a problem with drugs and alcohol. and started to admit it and started to actually look at that and say, yeah, that could be me. I didn't even have to say it was. I just said it could be. And when I opened that door, it so confirmed what I'd always known and fought, because I was so desperate to constantly have that distraction, because I didn't want to face the inner turmoil that I had developed growing up, and the upset and the emotional turmoil that I was living with constantly, the emotional anguish. I didn't want to face it. And stopping is the beginning of facing it, which I would say your first 10 days or 7 days is somewhat sort of indicative of.
Actually, like for me, drug, it's not a, it's is not my main concern. You know what I mean? Like a drug for me, because for somebody, it's like, I guess it's
so between
addicted,
us
like
here,
between
but between us here, I would say happiness seems to be the goal that you're looking to achieve, which suggests that your experience is often unhappy. Because if it's something you don't have, it's something you're claiming the opposite of is what you have.
It's I mean, like, it's hard because the happiness and sadness is happening to me in both lenses, right?
Yes. Yes.
So in my 40 days, I have a moment that I'm flourish, I am excited, I'm meditating under the sun, and like I'm just woo. And there's moment that I just want to die, you know, because I'm not motivated in any direction, because everything goes to
So would you call that a mood swing?
I think it will happen for all of us, but the reason I'm very aware of it, because I'm monitoring, I have a time to just observing myself, like very like closely, like moment to moment and hour to hour, and like documented what's happening to me. So maybe
you're
I'm just
describing a sentient nature.
yes, but
one aware of the movement, the back and forth, the teeter-totter, coming up and down, adjusting, shifting.
yes, but in every single of those way, like in the 31 days, so that obviously I'm bombarding myself with external happiness. So it's
Yes.
probably I wouldn't be like sad that much, because every time I feel a little bit down, I use one of those externally thing to lift me
Good.
up, right?
Yeah, well, that's a clue.
So and but I don't, like, when I'm off of that thing, when I'm in my 40 days, I don't even want drug. You know, like this this is the thing. Like it's not my concern at all. Like my concern now is that I've been dealing with more is about one, the experience that happened to me for last 31 days in terms of socializing, interaction with others, like all stuff, stories that happened to me.
Yeah.
And now how without any external happiness, I can still can you still have faith on your dream? You know, like for me, it's about like, okay, now you're on your own. Imagine you're in an island by yourself, and nothing is there. Can you create a story in your mind and be entertained and be fulfilled with it?
So next time, and we're going to finish off here in the next 15 minutes or so, one of the things I want you to consider, and my suggestion is that most of what tends to happen for any of us happens when we're not in the face of other people, because we end up considering what we did in the face of other people at other times. When there's a little pressure in the engagement, because there's always some seeming requirement, it seems like anyhow, I certainly fall prey to those ideas, to do something well enough to be listened to or well enough to be heard. And, you know, the question would be, what is the thing that you feel like you struggle with the attachment to, want more of, seem to always have been, maybe something that's been a thread pretty consistent in your life that you feel, do you have obsessive thoughts would be a question. Thoughts that seem to just continue, not always wanted thoughts, but seem to possess you in a sense that they almost feel like they're happening to you rather than being caused by you. And that can be a question. You don't need to answer it way. Sometimes the immediacy of the answer comes to conclusions that aren't always accurate enough because that consideration and that meditation hasn't been allowed, where you just kind of live with it. And then, like I was told by a woman who runs the Midwest Center for Depression, Anxiety and Depression. I think her name was Melinda Bassett, and she created a set of CDs. And she was a non-psychologist who created a center for people suffering from anxiety and depression and suicide. And one of the things she said that I thought was really fascinating, she had no experience other than she'd suffer from depression and couldn't seem to get out of it on her own. So she created ways to start looking at it to help her. Uh-huh. One of the things she said is listen to the voice in your head. Just listen to the voice in your head and start listening. And what I normally hear from people when I tell them, and they immediately come, well, I don't do that. And then about a week or two later, I hear, oh my God, I would never allow anyone to talk to me the way I talk to myself. And what I heard when I was on the beach, I used to walk 5 miles in the sand every day, back from the pier and back and forth. And it was my daily meditation at lunch. And
well, let me know when next time you went.
It's been a while. It's been a while. My hip hurts now. I mean, I'm like 95 years old. But the thing that occurred to me, since I was a kid, I heard this. What I first realized is that the things I said to myself were not kind. They were abusive. They were vindictive. They were spiteful. They were demanding. They were hostile. And what I heard was one day this voice that said, you're such an idiot. You're such an idiot. You're such an idiot. You're such. And I thought, fuck, I have been saying that to myself since I was in the single digits. When I went to pick something up and just missed it and didn't grab it accurately. You're such an idiot. If I left my keys and couldn't find them, the slightest thing would generate this internal dialogue that was so hateful and vengeful and spiteful. And I began to write those things down. As I gave them a place on paper, all of a sudden they had a place to live and I didn't need to maintain them in my head.
Wow, that's good. That's a good tip.
So somehow I thought that my life depended on that voice, that brutality was a condition of my success, because if I wasn't brutal, I wouldn't succeed. And that it always included brutality, rather than seeing that the effortlessness of love and functionality and things working. If everything's working right now, it's not struggling. The universe never has its hand on its hips with an attitude saying, I'm not doing this today. I'm sick of this. It just does what it does. And the inanimate objects that we think we're better than because we can think about ourselves actually know exactly what to do and are doing that right now and have always done just that. Whatever they do, they're doing. Pretty amazing that they know exactly what to do and just do it without thinking. And they don't suffer from depression. They don't suffer from caustic attitudes toward other people. They don't kill their own species or other atoms for the sake of feeling better and feeling more control or power. They may merge, they may transmute, they may come, but those are things they're designed to do in heat and in other conditions. They just do what they're doing, which is what all the elements were created out of that we use. And the oxygen that we use is created. And the carbon in our bodies was created from. So there seems to be an intelligence that's pretty smart, that if it is the basis of our existence, we all share. Not something we need to achieve, something we have. And if I have to have things, I must not be denying what I have to think I have to have something else. Because having to have something is redundant. It's like needing to have something. It's like needing to need something. I mean, it's just redundant. It's an overlay that's unnecessary. And that's the redundancy of thinking about itself, and thinking someday more thinking will solve the problem, and more thinking will solve the problem, and more thinking will solve the problem.
So if we don't need anything, like right now we don't need, I mean, I know, is it ideal, right? Like
I'm saying our being essence has no need because it has no lack. And it's an absolute state of being that is very hard for a brain to wrap itself around, because that brain is made as a result of it. It's already in it. It doesn't need to wrap itself around it to be in it. And those ideas, if you think about the way we talk about, I can't wrap my brain around it. My skull is already wrapped around my brain. My brain is already nicely housed. I don't need to rewrap it for it to do what it can do by starting to understand things that it can't see. Understanding is another form of seeing. It's the way we see things we can't see. It's the way invisibility becomes visible. It's the way things unseen become obvious and recognized and known to be, regardless of what we see and think. That's real understanding, utilized in a way that actually understands things accurately enough to understand everything simultaneously, to say whatever it is right now. And if it is what it is, it must know exactly what it's doing for me to be here. And I must thus know everything there is to know, whatever that knowing is. Doesn't mean I'm expressing it very well. Doesn't mean I'm thinking about it very well, but it means the capacity is there. And if that's my basis, that is a pretty awesome adventure to explore, rather than try to figure out why my thinking can't conclude my thinking as being all that is all the time. That venture is doubtful, which causes doubt naturally. So the clarity of the doubt is saying, oh, I'm thinking something that's doubtful. That's all. I am not doubtful in my essence. You are not doubtful. We are not doubtful. But my thinking can be doubtful. My thinking can be irresponsible while I maintain absolute responsibility for everything I do. And I can't actually be irresponsible, not ironically, if I'm not responsible. Irresponsibility would be responsibility if that's all there was, if it was the only thing I could do. So part of this first, we're going to have 3 of these, I would expect. And if my expectations aren't fulfilled, demand and insist and pester. No, I won't. I'm kidding. But my sense is with these conversations, if we have a beginning, middle, and end, it's just like the story of our life forms.
Yeah, no, for sure. No,
we meet together and introduce the ideas, then we come back and start to talk about the things we talked about. And what I tend to do is re-listen to these on the podcast so that I can hear from a point of view of being an observer to what I'm now more engrossed in, and often miss points that are important and miss things you've said because I'm too insistent trying to make my point to hear what your point is, and end up seeing it only when I'm actually looking as an observer and listening. So I tend to listen to that.
That's smart. I like it.
You know, I was a dumbass for many years, and I learned a few things and became a smart ass, and now I'm trying to be a wise ass. So all the while.
That's a very, very beautiful transition.
Well, it's not quite as shitty to admit being an ass as it is to pretend you're not.
Well,
kind of like having dirty diapers and not changing them.
The whole bad is part of me. So bad is part of it. There is nothing out there, like everything, every sensation, every smells, every logic, every unlogic, everything is it just there is a connection between a bunch of neurons that happen in that boundary. So like if you can activate those without external activation, so that's the pure power that you can be anywhere, anytime, and just activate the way we wish.
My sense is, my greater sense, my maybe greater awareness, if I can go that far to claim some sense of knowing that I can express in words sufficient to actually represent it, is that thinking is designed to express truth and knowledge and peace and reality. It's designed to do that. That's its design, to channel it almost, to actually just express it, rather than conclude it. When I ask my brain to conclude reality and truth, it goes haywire. And all of the anxious disorders are basically the brain functioning out of order. And if the order of my thinking is that my brain comes first and I depend on reality from my brain, I now am acting out of order. And why wouldn't my thinking become out of order and my experience and my physical anxious nervous systems be out of order? naturally they would be.
Yeah.
So those disorders are actually the admission openly that we're thinking out of order. And what do we do when we think out of order? Act out of control. Why? Because we're actually admitting we have no control over this disorder because it's all imposed as a thought, acting as it's true, which is delusional, and we have no basis in delusion whatsoever other than what we think about it. And then all that's affected is the thinking we're doing and the bodily somatics that are caused as a result of it, and the anxious, prone, pressure created, stress created, et cetera. And how we afflict it on everyone else because we couldn't possibly want to admit we'd be so stupid and insane as to actually do this intentionally. So being a victim becomes the natural role. I'm not doing it. It's not me. You started it. Interesting. We blame somebody else for starting it and don't want to finish it. We just continue it by making someone else responsible, which means I'm not. And if I'm responsible and claiming I'm not, that's pretty good mess I'm about to create in the next moment I act or think. So one of the questions coming back, a couple of things I want to dig into a little bit. You're from Tehran.
Not originally from a city called Gorgan. But I moved to Tehran, which is capital of Iran, when I was 10 years old. 9 years old.
You were there after the Islamic Republic.
Yeah, I think
the Republican Guard.
Islamic Republic
79 or 80.
And 79.
Yeah.
1979.
I was working in Beverly Hills and watched the protests of people who escaped during that time. And Los Angeles actually has one of the largest populations of Persians outside of Iran.
Yes.
From around the world. It has a huge population. So, well, the point is that right now there's a lot going out over there that I would suggest reflects the kind of thinking we're talking about on the social level. And if we think about these things individually and see the impact we have, it's easy to begin to realize that societies are only made up of all the collective thinking of all the people involved. And if those things that are happening are corrupt and hateful and spiteful and contemptful and condemning people to oppression and suppression, we are all participating in that by contributing to a line of thought that thought can be so right as to allow certain people.
I don't think the whole that issue again is about thoughts. I think the whole issue is not.
That's why we're going to talk about it.
Thought is a tool. Like I think the whole issue that is coming is from the desire.
So let me give you this idea. When somebody thinks their thinking is the source of reality, they think anyone else who doesn't think like them threatens their life and should be killed.
So that is coming from desire, but the thoughts comes to how to implement it.
I don't know the exact order.
But this is important. Like
I'm looking at the result. I'm looking at the result.
But if you're gonna tackle the if you see as an issue, you want to tackle the issue, you need to go to the source.
Yes. Well, I would say thinking is the source.
You don't look at the result actually. If you're gonna you can look at this result forever and nothing will change. But if you're gonna make a change, you need to look at the source.
Yes. But if you overlook the results and think that what needs to be changed are the results, you're treating the symptom rather than the cause that you're talking about
overlooking right is not good anyway. Like overlooking just waste of time. Yeah. Like if maybe see some pattern out of it by overlooking something that it can probably move you toward more illusion than because you're pushing and you can something over and over and over and over. But I think the situation that is happening in the world and all specifically actually is very critical in that part of the world. I believe that you're going to play a very big role in terms of that whole consciousness.
It's been happening as long as humans have made believe who we are is what we think. Humans have pitted themselves against others in righteous, indignant ways to justify killing others in the name of simply not thinking like they do. That's all that it seems to come down to. Now, I don't know if desire is a function of thought or love. I don't think love has desire. I don't think an essential being has desire because it already is everything. So what would it desire? But I would say it can be an induced state that's created to try to escape the induced state we're unwilling to admit we're creating, so that we can desire to get away, desire to think that our thinking is going to save us from the thinking that's putting us in peril. So we're going to talk further about that. This is to consider. So we'll pry your brain a little bit. And which I know you're doing, which I really appreciate, which is one of the reasons I asked you to be here. And one of the reasons I spent 3 hours talking with you, because I was fascinated by the fact that you maintained eye contact the entire time, were open, asked questions, participated, and offered insight that wasn't reactive and defensive. It was actually, I could see you're exploring. And I don't find that a lot. And I suspect that's our nature. Because wonder is awesome, but why is it that awful seems to be more than awesome? It's some awe in place of full awful. That seems like the fullness of pain that we've experienced so long we take for granted is normal, when in fact it's an indication of not paying attention to the pain. We're waiting for the fact that it gets so painful to finally pay attention to it, rather than say, we know it immediately. We know immediately when we're wrong because we have that sensation, and we can correct things quickly before we have to create big messes and defend them as though they're the only thing we can do or the cause of someone else having done them. That's possible for us. And I would say that's our nature. If our instinct is to survive and thrive, and it seems like all organisms lead toward survival because they all seem to be somewhat protective of demise. They all seem to know naturally. Rabbits know to run really quick when there's a fox in the neighborhood. And you listen, the fox relies on catching that rabbit, but the faster rabbits don't get caught quite as quickly. So it sort of indicates there's an instinct to avoid threats. And when the threat becomes what we call our own instinct, that is an instinct. That's obsessive thinking that we've become so used to, is to think that it's real, trying to kill us. And that's what addiction is doing. We are never addicted to things that are healthy for us, ever. People have never died from overdosing on broccoli or asparagus. Doesn't happen. It's always, think about what we do with drugs. Typically, we take something that naturally occurs and then refine it or continue to develop it so the most toxic aspects of it become so concentrated that the impact on us is overwhelming. Cocaine's a good example. They chewed coca leaves, the Mayans, Incans, for centuries, chewed it. It's like tea, very soft, subtle stimulant. What do we do? Boil it down with acetone. Take the one thing in it that's stimulant and produce something that is so highly stimulative that it immediately causes a reaction in our body that's unnatural, an allergy. And I would say our ultimate allergy is lying. We're allergic to lying because we're absolutely bound in truth, and allergies are abnormal reactions to things, meaning that we end up redoing the same thing we're allergic to over and over and over again because it's an abnormal reaction. We keep doing the thing over and over and over again, thinking someday it'll get better, while the thing we're trying to avoid gets worse. Because in that same way we're not paying attention to it, it's growing. Whatever's festering is growing. If I have bacteria somewhere on my body and I do nothing about it, it is going to grow because its thriving nature is to survive. Like viruses, which we just witnessed a pretty good example of. So anyway, I love you and I appreciate this greatly. And I want to talk about your family and what's going on and talk about it from the context of this thinking issue and see if we can master peace.
Yeah, no, it is definitely. That's I think good start. I mean, I'm learning a lot because you are dive down onto this for a long time, and to me, experience is something that you cannot buy it, or just the best way you just can just put yourself, like feel what and those experiences means. And for me, like talking to you is like a brotherhood, fatherhood, whatever you call it, friendhood. Like I enjoy it because to me, like it's very valuable, especially in this point of my life that um like when the project getting to the part of like the hardest part, like I don't know, like any project can be like get to the problem, like you have to solve it, and like you're confused and all this thing. And I think you came in the time in my life that helping me a lot to moving forward and like kind of see myself outside, because it's like these all things that you've been concerned. I feel you, like I somehow like living with those concern, and like in a global scale, like individual scale, and you see that like is not doing it like based on the value and potential that you have experienced. You see like it's far away, and you want to do some action toward that harmony, like bringing like different vibration to just the whole, and you like to picture the beauty that you're projecting. And I think in that aspect we are in line.
Yeah.
I think we both like we are in a team, like in a team. That's how I feel, like my feeling. It's
Yes.
just like
Well, and that recognizes the natural unity. Community includes unity, and the human race is a community. And we've been in a race toward our own destruction in a big way and not talked about it openly. And it's largely been sourced in mental problems. And I would say almost exclusively sourced in mental problems, since mental thoughts happen
so
mentally
I, so
and
I think
start all voluntary actions.
I think yeah, I think if like yeah, what you're doing, if you can bring like did you identify the issue, and then we go to the like a source of that issue, and like eventually for us, and for us mainly, like to become clear, like this is like a systematic way of living that have been like implemented by authorities. And then you say if you're gonna like change that way of like, because these feeding like the thinking, like what you've been what you have been sharing. So
Yeah.
this can be like a mainstream way of thinking in the society, right? So which is not this is not happening now. The mainstream of thinking in society is about all thoughts and like projecting about like achievement, and never is enough, and capitalism and materialistic and all these things that we're feeding to our society. So if like what you're saying, like saying all these things, actually these are addiction that like we injecting to our people, and that injection coming from I believe is systematic. Is something that those people, they have these strong desires over like power, or like manipulation, because we are living in the world, like just if you see like every country as one family, like for example United States is a family, and Canada is a family, is a cousin, and like you related all these country as one family. So we know for a fact that if the situation in terms of our survival get worse, there is no law exists, there is no agreement exists. We will fight to the end for the survival of our family. But I think now, but what is the time now instead of seeing every country, and some families are worse, like the country like Iran, the parents actually are the worst parent, like the parents, they're like abusive parents, like the worst parent, like for example in the United States, maybe their parents are okay, maybe some countries like they have a best parent, but we have a spectrum of like parenthood for that family. So but I think now it's just but in terms of international laws like United States or England or like China or Russia or Iran or whatever, the priority is inside the family. Like if I can deplete some resources from other part of the world and my family inside become more happier, so I will do it. I don't care about like that.
And I want to focus on, we can talk forever about all the distinctions, but when we talk about what's in common, we start talking about everyone presently, where the impact of everything that's happening can be made. And the natural laws, there are laws, orders in the universe. The universe functions on the basis of physical laws. Mm-hmm. Those laws are natural. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And when we obstruct those laws and think they're not, we think we are superior to them, rather than products of them. And our human experience is probably the currency of our life form, mm-hmm. because it's actually addressing this. Now, if I'm thinking for you, and I think you don't know what I know, I'm not thinking of what we share. I'm thinking about what I think I know and you don't. That's a hard conversation to have if we share something in common that we both absolutely know, and I know you know it. My approach to this discussion is much different because I just sit back and wait for you to confirm it rather than argue with you about it, though I have that tendency in instances where I'm trying to make a point I'm afraid I might forget if I don't insist on being heard now. But ultimately, if you don't know it, and I'm speaking to everybody who's listening and everybody who isn't listening, I'm speaking to everybody. If you didn't know it, then it would all be up to one of us to come up with. And the way we've treated people through history is exactly the way we put people in charge of people, rather than notice that people have always been in charge collectively. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, and I want to end on this today for time's sake, I've got a lunch.
For sure.
Interesting, anarchy, which is considered the abandonment of law and has been used through human history to kill people and assassinate people and justify executing people. Anarchy, right? You know what the essence of anarchy is in the utopian ideal? Love. You know why? No rules necessary. Why? Because it's loving, caring, abundant, naturally supportive. Contributes everything to everyone all the time. It's our nature. It's what we do share. It's what we have in common. And it tends to be that we don't fight over love, we fight over like. What we like and don't like tends to be the issue we have with other people. So I can love everyone and still not quite like everybody because they don't have ideas like I have. But when I start noticing that dislike is being caused by my idea, not theirs, I start claiming the responsibility that I naturally have and act accordingly, rather than demand people start listening to me and they begin to respect my boundaries. When my boundaries are just limitations of thought, I presume are real. Then they're not. They're just thoughts. They're just thoughts. So
I would love to live in the world that every single person have the same mindset that you have, because in that case we're gonna live in the harmony without any.
We do. We're just not talking about it.
No, we do. But
we do live in that world, and we're not talking about it. We think the world is a world of our own thinking rather than as it is. And if everybody knows, if that thing's absolute, whatever it is, it wouldn't even be a thing. But if the absolute is absolute and it's absolute, there can't be exceptions to it. Nobody can know any less or more. It can't be discriminate. Mm-hmm. It can't be divisible. It can't be something to fight over. It can't be in bits and pieces. It's just something that is as it is. and we are it as it has been given us. It's not going to give us some of what it has because it's infinite. What does it have to lose by giving us everything? Nothing. There's nothing to lose in that.
Mm-hmm.
So the finding we're always doing is the seeking for why we keep thinking we need to find something that isn't lost. We can't find the place we're always in if we constantly think we're not there. And that's the source of addiction and mental illness and dysfunctional thinking and productivity. Dysfunctional productivity means non-productive. There's no benefit. There's no food. You got a bunch of seeds and put it in the cellar and never put them in the ground and wonder when harvest time comes, there's nothing to eat. It's not a curiosity. It was intent. Maybe intention is who we are. Maybe that's the ultimate desire. What we intend to do is what happens, not what we think should happen. And when we begin conceding these things accurately, it becomes a lot easier to let things happen and become a witness to the education we're getting, rather than consider that all we know is only what we think and fight for that. So we're going to carry this on further. And I know in the meantime that you will think about it during this 31 days of exploration you're in. When does your 40 days start?
Well, 31 days more about not thinking a little bit, but next month, 13th of next month, November 13th, November 12th.
Well, maybe we'll aim for that so we can be with you at the beginning of that, or at some point, maybe toward the end of the 31 days, and then 7 days.
So, and
into
also,
the 10 days.
so is it can it off the recording?
Not yet.
Not yet. No, I would like to see you because I'm planning some trips.
Yeah.
And I would like to share what I'm where I'm going.
Sure.
And I would love to you just share it with you.
I am available for anyone out there. There's an email address. I'm happy to talk to you, obviously, and anyone else. And I'm happy that anyone else listening knows that.
Okay, but what is my plan?
No, not necessarily with your plan, but knows that we are open to one another and being able to converse about those things as you go about doing them.
Yeah, for sure. Like
my sense is we offer each other perspective. When I'm blind in my own thinking, I'm one-dimensional. That's self-centered thinking. It's thinking all I'm thinking, who I am is centered in the thoughts I have, rather than actually in the thing we share. And so my thinking ends up being skewed and my actions get skewed, and my potential to offer any perspective becomes lost in the space I'm preoccupied with, when in fact it isn't lost at all. It's always there being ignored. Mm-hmm. And to act oblivious to what's obvious is a choice. It's not mandatory. It's just a choice. So when we're doing it, we're choosing it. And to be choosing it at least concedes we're responsible for it, rather than makes believe somehow it's happening to us rather than being caused by us. Love you guys, everyone here, there.
Love you, Jack, and love everybody. I guess.
Well, I had, for years, I had a prayer that I just said, thank you, thank you, thank you. And then I thought, well, what am I thanking for? And I said, love. And then I thought, well, I love you. I love you. I love you. And started speaking to whatever that thing is that in prayer I would normally think was a man or a huge something or another out, and started realizing if love is love and I just complete that cycle in my thinking, that's the ultimate prayer, because now I'm confirming what I've been given rather than seeking more of it and wondering why God's not giving it to me. Think of the way we pray for more from an infinite source as though we don't already have what it is. How could it not give it to us? It would completely violate the concept of an infinite source to begin with. So we already have it. We've always had it. We're always where we are. What's happening is always happening. These are physical examples in our relative universe, seeming relative universe, that reveal the absolute in our midst, in our present state of being, where we are in this seeming limited world and limited body that reveals the absolute nature of our existence in what we thought was relative and limited, but is not, because it reveals. It's just like everything that changes. When you think about everything, the one thing that doesn't change is that everything changes. So when you're considering everything rather than some things, the absolute is revealed. When you consider some things, it's just a lengthy discussion that's gone on through the entirety of human history, trying to figure out why we feel less than when all we're focused on is less than everything. So things are as they are. I love you, brother.
Love you, Jack. Thanks for